know that when I teach a class, I oftentimes, quite honestly, get more out of the teaching probably than anybody ever gets being taught by me, just because, I don't know, I just see it that way myself. But I get things out of just the way my mind works. When I start talking, my mind processes. And so I was teaching, I teach the introduction, basically intro level classes over at T-Challenge, for the level ones. And you just really get back to the basics of the faith. Who are we? Who is God? What is the Bible? Those kinds of things. And this week we were talking about, one of the things we were talking about is the immanence and transcendence of God. And those are a couple of goofy words, I know. But the immanence of God is something that man has struggled with, as well as the transcendence of God. And the immanence of God literally just means God is here with us. He's immanent. He's near his creation. Deuteronomy 4, chapter 4, verse 7 reads, "For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, whenever we call upon him? What other nation, what other people, what other religion, what other faith has a God so near that when we pray to him, he's here?" I mean, he's here. The transcendence of God literally means that God is so big. He's over. He doesn't exist inside our time-space continuum, but he's outside of above all, seeing all, knowing all. The idea that God is so much bigger than even we can imagine or fathom. Psalm 113 and verse 4 says, "The Lord is high above all nations, and his glory above the heavens." So on one hand, we see a God that is immanent with us. We pray to him and he's here. And yet, he exists so far outside of what we can ever imagine. A guy by the name of Stuart Hamblin writes, "God is big enough to rule the universe, yet small enough to live within our hearts." And there's trying to grasp that concept. The deists believed that God literally spun the world into existence and then he stepped out. And that God is transcendent in the fact that he's above and beyond and outside the creation. And that he doesn't interact with the creation. He's set the laws of motion and in motion, and he stepped out to see what we might do with it. Then there's the pantheists on the other hand, and they're stuck on the immanence of God. That God is so immanent that he actually is the creation. God is the trees. God is the mountains. God is the stars of the creation. God is somehow in the creation. That's how the immanence of God is. It's hard to see a God that you cannot actually see and touch. And even the Israelites struggled with that when Moses was up on Mount Sinai getting the law, and they were like, "We need to see our God." So they got Aaron to make them the golden calf. Remember the story, because they wanted to see God. They wanted to be able to put their hands on God. They wanted to touch God, understand God. And yet we can't do that, because although he is immanent, my Bible tells me that he is so immanent that he literally dwells inside of me. Yet he's so huge and transcendent. He transcends everything, my understanding included, my ability to grasp who he is even in his entirety. He gives us little snippets in his word, but we would not be able to handle the greatness of God. And so the battle wages, the immanence versus the transcendence of God. And here's what's going through my mind. I'm going to border on, I'm bordering on politics today, but I'm not. I don't want to do politics, but these issues become perceived political. They're not. They're moral. The political realm is constantly assaulting the moral realm. Constantly. But as I look into our world, and I'm seeing a Romans chapter 1 thing, and we've done a lot of talking, I've done a lot of talking with people, and I'm just going to show up in Romans chapter 1 for a minute here. I'm kind of bouncing around today, just because that's kind of where my thoughts are today. But Romans chapter 1 mirrors another verse that was a long time ago. As you remember, the period of the Judges, when God literally would raise up individuals. It was called the period of the Judges. When Israel, his people needed something, they didn't have a king, they weren't ruled by a king yet. It was still this, the law thing. And so when they would need something done, when something was going terribly wrong, when they would have an enemy approaching, or whatever, God would raise up a judge. Remember some of the famous ones where Samson was a judge, and Deborah was a judge, and the last of the judges was Samuel, who was also the high priest. And but God would raise up this person. But at one of the most troubling verses to me in the entire Bible, which then sets up the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and 1st, 2nd Kings, those books, when God began to set up in Israel a king, a physical king, because the people wanted it, was the last verse of the book of Judges, Judges chapter 21, verse 25. It simply says this: in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. I think it's one of the most troubling verses in all of Scripture. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And I wonder about that, because they had a rule of law. They had what God had passed down through Moses, was the Levitical law, and it was this way to live. There was this guidelines. There was nothing left for really even interpretation in that law, but it was this way that they were to live. And yet, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And trouble is on the horizon. Understand, there's something about to take place. There's a change, there's a transition after this verse that's about to take place. And it's going to take them away from God, not closer to God. There's something that they're about to change in their relationship with God, from, a relationship with God, ruled by God, to, no, we really want to play more in the system of this world. We want to really distance ourselves more. In fact, as you read through that story, Samuel's just pulling his hair up because he doesn't know what to do. And God says, Samuel, relax, man. Just do what they say. They're not rejecting you. They're not rejecting you. You're okay. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. It's all about me. It's them turning their back on me. It's them walking away from me. It's wanting something different than me. And so, I think about that. And then I read Romans chapter 1, and this passage just keeps coming back to me as I look out into our world today. And not just the world, into the United States of America. I look out and I see this playing out today more than ever in so many different ways. But there's a few verses I just want to read out of here. I'm going to start reading in chapter 1 and verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. We're talking about truth here again. There is an absolute truth. There is absolute truth. Because Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth. I am truth. And so when we start talking about what is truth, there's different values of truth. Let's just put it that way. There are things that we garner from our own lives, as we call truth, that hinge upon our own perception of reality. Things that happen. I might say this. If I'm at work and I'm wearing my little sneakers or tennis shoes or something, and I drop a hammer and it lands on my shoe, the truth of the matter is that hurt a lot. But I could drop the same hammer on the guy's foot who's wearing steel-toed shoes, and he's just going to think, that didn't hurt at all. Now, the same exact thing happened, but it hurt my foot. That's my truth. The reality is it didn't hurt his foot at all, because he had protection from it. It didn't hurt. So he had a different truth. And that's kind of a silly example, but that's relative truth, okay? What I'm talking about today is not relative truth. What I'm talking today is absolute truth. These are concepts of God, concepts of how we live, concepts of morality and decency and what's right that hinge not on my experience, but on the attributes of God, who is God. Because Jesus said, I am truth. And Jesus is not relative. Jesus is God. He doesn't change. My Bible says, I'm the same yesterday, I'm the same today, and I'm the same forever. This is who I am. What you see is what you get. I'm God. I don't change. I'm not relative. I am truth. And so one of the great struggles, probably the greatest struggle of man, is learning to live in the truth of God. Learning to identify the truth of God. Trying to separate what is my relative truth from his absolute truth. And put my relative truth into submission to his absolute truth. That's one of the great mysteries of man, and being able to live together and get along together and understand our place in this world, our place in this creation. And then we get back to the text here. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. David said in the book of Psalms that the creation declares the glory of God. It's not that we have to look into our world and search for God. The Bible says that the truth about God is known to man. It doesn't, even Charles Darwin, and he comes up with his survival of the species and his dissertation on his birds and all that kind of thing. But by his own admission, even early on, the things that drove him nuts were the human eye or a peacock feather. Those are the two instances he gave. Absolutely drove him insane. Why? Because they declared the glory of God. They declared divine, or I should say intelligent design. They bothered him. They boggled his mind. He couldn't comprehend how the human eye could evolve. He looked at a peacock feather and the beauty of the peacock feather, and he couldn't fathom how it could have evolved. Because it declares that somebody invented it and designed it. I mean, who among us would be walking out into the woods or whatever, and maybe they're just trudging along and some piece of woods that just is grown up and it's thick and it looks like nobody has ever been there before. And your foot happens to rub on something and you bend over and you see something in the soil, so you dig it up and you brush it back and you pull it up and you pull up a Timex pocket watch. And you think to yourself, wow, look what evolved here. You say that? No, you say, somebody lost a pocket watch. Why do you say that? Because it's obvious. It's got Timex written all over it. It's got its print on it. You know that watch was manufactured by somebody because things don't evolve that way. See, I don't know how many times I would have to take a handful of sawdust and just throw it up in the air and let it fall before a pocket watch came out of it. Because the heavens declare the glory of God. Paul was saying here, listen, what can be known about God is plain. It's plain. Because God has shown it to them, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. You know what Paul just said? There's not one person that's going to stand before God one day and say, I didn't know you existed. Nobody told me. Not one person. Because it's declared, it's printed. Not one person has lived that hasn't looked out the window in the morning, sat out on the deck and watched the sunrise or the sunset, the beauty of or sat on a dark night and looked up into the heavens with the billions and trillions of stars. My Bible tells me it declares, it screams out about God. Now it might not lead them to Jesus, but it leads them that there is something bigger than me out there, and I want to know that desire inside to know something more. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God, or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Basically, we worshipped ourselves in the creation. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God. They exchanged that which they knew to be true about God. They might have taken that truth that the Bible declares that they knew, and they might have exchanged that for something else. We don't want to deal with a transcendent God, so we're just going to cover that up. And we're going to exchange that for a lie. We're going to exchange the truth for a lie. Because why? Because the truth is uncomfortable. The truth calls me to a higher standard. The truth calls me to something more than myself. The truth calls me to become better, to become more, to become subservient to the transcendent God. Causes me, who calls me to be not about as much about myself, but about him. And to be honest with you, a lot of people don't want to be about a transcendent God. They want to be about themselves. They want to be about, what can I get? What can I have? So they exchanged, knowing this, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Here's where we come in. That's the beginning of it. This all begins, in my opinion, I'll be honest, this isn't fact, this is my humble opinion. Where we are today in our country, in America, really began when we began to question this? How do we begin to question this? Well, knowing the truth, God created. In the beginning, God created. We began to question that. We've already talked about Charles Darwin. It really hinged on that. We took what we knew to be true, we exchanged it for a lie, which is the whole evolution thing. Was always intended to be a lie, something else. We can't have that in the beginning God created. We can't have it. In the beginning God created tells me that I'm subservient to God. He transcends me. He transcends my thoughts. His ways are greater than my ways. His ideas are better than my ideas. His will supersedes my will. If I believe that in the beginning God holds me to account, it's much easier for me to place myself, although equally religious. Understand, there is nothing less religious and faith-based with evolution than God. I just choose to believe that nothing existed forever, and from nothing came something. There was a cloud of gases that existed forever, because that's more convenient to believe in, because I can understand and control the gases. But if God created and has lived forever, then that puts me down here. And I don't like to be there. It holds us to a higher standard. And certainly not God, because God holds us not just to a higher standard, but He defines those standards. He defines what they are. And so we struggle with this, and some people accept God, some people try and play the fence, which doesn't really work, and some people just reject God. They exchange the truth of what we know about God for a lie. And this is where we have come to, this place. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For the women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passions for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents. I find that interesting that one's in there. Disobedient to parents. Foolish, fatherless, or faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they knew God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. I read that and I look at our country today, and it breaks my heart. Because this isn't really about individuals. This isn't, we're talking about homosexuality is spelled out in there. What my problem is, that's individual. My heart goes out to those people who are trapped in that. What grabs me, and what has set up this whole sermon on my part, is that I just believe that war was declared on this country a long time ago by the deceiver. By the deceiver. Abraham Lincoln once said, "From whence shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall some transatlantic military giant step the earth and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe and Asia could not by force take a drink from the Ohio River or make a track on the Blue Ridge. In the trial of 1,000 years. No, if destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we will live forever or die by suicide." I look at that. I listen to that quote. And I wonder, what does suicide mean? I believe it was, I believe it was Stalin, who predicted that the fall of America, America would fall, but it would not be with a shot fired. It would be, America would die from within. George Washington predicted, in fact, what George Washington said, I didn't write this quote down, but he said, the death and destruction of a republic is almost as swift and severe as its birth. Why? Because we get this idea in our heads about freedom and what it means to be free. And most of you have heard me talk about this before. Freedom isn't free. Freedom has never, ever, 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 ever been about doing what you want when you want to because you're free. But free societies always wind up socialist, then communist, because people want to be free to do nothing. I don't have to, I'm free. And as soon as the majority are free to do nothing, or free to do whatever makes me feel good, or free to do what I want to, or free, you can't hold me to a lawful code, you can't hold me to a moral code, you can't hold me to, as soon as we give all that up, as soon as we trade all of that for a lie, what's the lie? God's not really God. This is all about me. I'm God. I'm my own God. I don't need your transcendent God. I don't need that. I don't want that. You can't make me. And no, I can't. I don't even want to make you. But the problem is people start with, I just want that. I just want to be left alone. I just want to be equal. I just want you to acknowledge me. And it goes from that, and eventually, which is where we are today, which is not only, it's not about just, I want the way I think of things to be equal with the way you think of things. It's, I want your way to be silenced. That's where we are today. And so we've gone down there, and I think everybody, there is a freedom. And it comes from God. That's what makes America great in the first place, is the freedoms that we have comes from the idea of freedom in Christ. And that means I am free to accept or reject, but not change. I'm free to live in my own reality, meaning if I don't want to believe in God, God does not force us to believe in Him. That's what this whole story is all about, from cover to cover, is God's plan for us to choose Him. But we're free not to choose Him. That's my own reality. That's the truth of my own reality. But I am not free to change the reality of truth. I can't change the fact that the truth exists. I'm just free to not acknowledge it. As a society, as a culture, when we begin to take everybody's relative truths and replace that for the absolute truth, that's when we start getting into trouble. And watch history. Open up a book. Pick your free society. In the history of man, every single one of them dies the same death from within. Because we just can't, at some point, handle anybody telling us what we have to do, how we have to live. Can't do it. Can't handle it. Can't stomach it. And so the societies just turn inside out from within and are soon destroyed. Oh, we're not going to go anywhere. Trust me, we're not going anywhere. The United States of America will always be here. But it will change. It will change. Another great quote by Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. For good, God-fearing men to do nothing. And here's what inspired really the sermon today, was this act, getting into conversations with people, and I talked with our state representative, most of you know him, Josh Heitzman. I talked with him a couple days ago, we were on the phone, he says, man, my frustration is I'm talking to people of faith. I'm talking to Christians who don't want to do anything, they don't want to say anything, because they believe in an immanent God who's sovereign over everything, and if God wants America to survive, America's going to survive, and there's nothing I can do about it or want to do about it. It's just God's deal. And how crazy is that? I do believe in the sovereignty of God. But God has always, from the beginning of this book, always worked through the free will of his people. He's always said, this is my plan. Go do it. Always. Without exception. And yet we look in a world today where the church is silent. I mean, friends, please. Please hear me. We are having a conversation today about whether or not men should be able to take showers with girls. We're having a conversation. It's a battle in the public square right now. And I look into Romans 1 and I say, they have exchanged the truth for a lie. They thought themselves wise and they have become fools. And I think, how could God spell it out any clearer for us than for us Christians, people of faith? You don't even have to be a Christian. You just have to have an ounce of common sense to look out into the world and think, this is probably not a good idea. And this isn't about people who are struggling with their sexual identity. This is not about people who are struggling with their own concept of truth. No. This is about rewriting absolute truth, moral truth, as a culture. Yes, we deal with people, and in the church, we're called to love these people that are struggling with their own identity of truth. We're called to reach out to them, serve them, love them, do whatever we can for them. But absolutely under no circumstances do we rewrite what we know about absolute truth because somebody else struggles with it. And that's where we're at today. And I'm not kidding you. This is coming to a church near you. It's coming. Are we ready for it? Men, this is a sermon primarily for you. Ladies, get behind you guys. It is time for good men to do something. This is a wake-up call. In my estimation, this is a wake-up call. I don't know what other leaf we can turn. I do not know what other page gets turned in our culture. I don't know. I don't know what level of depravity could sink us lower than refusing to stand up and protect our women and our children from those who seek to... And I'm not talking about everybody who's struggling with their reality, who's a guy that wants to use a women's bathroom is using it for ill. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if I'm taking someday one of my little granddaughters to Target Corporation, who this week announced that they will be the first to get rid of gender-specific bathrooms as a corporation. If I'm taking my granddaughter there and I've got to turn her loose in the bathroom, it ain't happening, man. It ain't happening. Unless we stand up and say, wait a minute. No. We've been pushed far. I don't know how much lower we get. How much lower can we sink? How much? Well, I suppose we could just kill our grandkids. Oh wait, we're already doing that. So this is a wake-up call. God is not going to just fix this. Israel had a problem one time. There was this huge giant. His name was Goliath. And he was out there and he was mocking God and he was mocking God's people and he was mocking everything God was about. And there were all the king that they had to have and all the big warriors and the big tough burly guys were all cowering in their tents going, what are we going to do? God, what are you going to do? Did God strike Goliath dead? Not before a little 13-year-old boy decided, oh, you ain't mocking my God. You're not making a mockery of my truth. You're not making a mockery of what I know. Give me some stones. I'm going to go take care of this guy. Then God intervened. Yeah, I think it's nothing short of God, a miracle of God, that David brought down Goliath. But God did it through David, because David got off his duff and went and did something about it. You look at Gideon. Gideon had a problem. Gideon didn't even want to... What? Who are you calling me to do what? Because Israel had a problem. It was the Midianites. They'd been down their throat for some 7 years. They were going to destroy him. God said, Gideon, I want you to get up and go take care of it. And Gideon's like, Gideon was. I love the way that God, he just wants you to go. He works. Gideon's like, no, I need a sign. I'm going to put the old goat skin out or the whatever out there, and in the morning, if it's all wet with the dew, but the ground around it's dry, then I'll know this is God, then I'll go. And he wakes up in the morning, and of course, it's soaking wet and the ground around is dry, and he's like, well, you gonna go? Now I just got one more test. Now tomorrow, if it's dry and the ground around it's wet, then I'll know it's God, then I'll know. And he wakes up the next morning, and it happens, and he puts this big army together, and God says, no, you're not taking all of them. You're not taking all of them. Why? Have you seen how many's out there? There's thousands of them out there. Well, you're not taking that many. God whittled them down to 300 men. Why? Because God wanted to do something. Could he have just struck down the Midianites? Absolutely. But he wanted his people to do something. Do something. And then he took care of it. I believe if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, next line, and turn from their wicked ways. What are our wicked ways? Complacency, I think, is at the top of the list. We cry out to God, we say, oh, God's sovereign, our God reigns, our God reigns. We love to sing that song, our God reigns. Well, you know what? He does reign, but he doesn't act unless his people are willing to get off their duffs and do something. So what are we going to do? I'm telling you, it's downhill from here. If God's people, against incredible odds, I mean, most people I talk to say, it's too late. It's never too late. Not with my God. Not with my God. But are we willing to get off our duffs and do something? Are we willing to say something? Are we willing to, Philippians 4. It's a very telling verse. This is about getting angry, guys. This is about, Jesus got angry. He saw injustice in the temple. He got angry. He went in there with a whip. I'm not telling you to get your whip out. There's a way about this. But Jesus went in, he changed the circumstances in the temple by force. It says he got angry. Philippians 4, verse 25. Can't possibly be Philippians 4, verse 25. It doesn't exist. It must be, wow, what have I done? What have I done? Anyway, it's in there somewhere, just trust me. He's saying, it's the verse, and you can all look it up later, be angry and sin not. But before that he said, when a man is, what we need to be doing is not be afraid to tell the truth to our neighbor. Don't be lying, put away the lies, put away the deceptions, just speak truth. And that's what I'm asking you today. And how are we going to do this? Man, we're going to be engaged in the battle in different ways. But I'll tell you, we will be engaged in the battle. You will be engaged in the battle. Now, we can be silent. We can do nothing. And we can wake up in 10 more years and our kids are actually absolutely living in a cesspool. I just can't imagine. I had one of my boys say to me the other day, I think I'm going to have kids. I don't even want to have kids. Why would I want to bring kids in and raise them in this world? You mean I couldn't imagine. I had a conversation the other day with a youngster on Facebook where they're already ingrained in school systems being able to use whatever bathroom they want. It's here already. We don't even know it. It's not going to go away. It's not going to get any better unless godly people stand up and say, no, it's not happening. Yeah, we got to get on our hands and knees and we got to cry out to God. And then we got to get busy. And I don't care. Maybe you need to be making phone calls to senators and representatives, writing open forms in the paper. And this it hasn't come to militant. It's not about raising, all of us loading up the shotguns and going down to City Hall. That's not what this is about. But this is about doing something. This is about making our voices heard and making sure our voices are heard. And it's going to start with someone. It's going to start with someone. And hopefully, as God lays it on the hearts of His people. But we've got too many. We talked about this, I think, 3 weeks ago. We talked about the offensiveness of the gospel. The gospel is offensive. We've got to be willing to be offensive. Not towards people, towards policies. Understand that. We're called to love transgenders. We're called to love homosexuals. We're called to love those people. This isn't about putting them down and making them feel like less of a citizen, but it's about holding them up in prayer. It's about loving on them. It's about helping them. It's about giving them a voice too, not crushing and silencing them. It's not about our way or the highway. It's about actually living out the gospel, protecting absolute truth, and letting God be the difference. Because He wants to do something in our culture. And understand that these issues have risen already because we've got complacent about honoring God, about insisting on absolutes. The church gave away to evolution a long time ago. We gave it up. We kept fighting against it. We started trying to reason it. Well, maybe God did create in evolution. We bought into it. And now we wake up today without a voice. And we gave it away. We gave it away. So I'm not inciting anybody to violence or arms. I'm inciting to action. Let's do something. Or the nation that I love. I love America. Love it. But I don't want to wake up in a few short years and not love it anymore because it's become something that doesn't function in the truth, but has tried to replace that truth and become a lie. And we're sinking fast. I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but I want you to think about it. What can I do? And I don't want you to think, man, I'm just one person, because we serve a great God, transcendent. He oversees it all. And yet He's so immanent that He's dwelling inside of me to empower me to do what? His good will. He has a plan here, guys. He's not surprised at where we've wound up. He's not taken back going, oh, what am I going to do? My God is over all this. He is in control. But He chooses to work through the free will of man. Falls in our court. What are we going to do? Are we going to do something? Are we going to let Him act? Do you want to see God? Do you want to see God move? Then do something. I wish I had been there when the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. Because they didn't have any weapons. They didn't have a huge city. God just said, nah, just walk around the walls. Once on the first day, twice on the second day. In silence, don't say a word. I want you quiet, just walk. On the seventh time around, on the seventh day, I want you to blast your trumpets. And when they did it, God moved. When they did what God asked, God moved. And so today, are we going to do what God asked? Are we going to stand simply for truth? And make our voice heard. Make our voice heard. Don't be ashamed of truth. And I believe we'll see God move. I believe it. I believe God just chomping at the bit to do something in America today. To do something in our world. There's not enough people that are willing to stand up. Well, I'm standing. And I don't know what that means. Sometimes the first line in a charge gets eliminated. Just say, there you go. Are you willing to stand up? Are you willing to lose? Are you willing to lose it all? I don't know what this all looks like, but he's got a plan. How are we going to fit into it? Father, we just